Aledo ISD is booming, but how will we keep up with the explosive growth? Over the next decade, thousands of new students will be entering the district, meaning new schools, changes in zoning, and major changes for your family as well. So in this video, we're going to cover what's coming, the potential new schools, potential rezoning, and what's important for your family to know if you're considering moving to the Aledo area. Now, if you are thinking about moving to the Aledo ISD area, or if you already even live here, this is going to be some important information because the schools that exist today may not be the schools that your kids go to in a few years. And that's because Aledo is one of the fastest growing school districts in Texas, with our projection being that we could more than double our student population in the next decade. So with that type of growth, there's going to be all sorts of things to consider, such as rezoning, traffic patterns, new schools, where they're going to go, and how all of that could impact your family. So let's hop into it. Okay, so if you have visited and or driven through the Aledo area anytime recently, you have seen all of the residential development going on. And so what does this mean for the growth of the school district? We are seeing multiple developments that are really adding homes, and they're selling well. It is not a great seller's market, right? There's not a ton of homes turning, but the new neighborhoods in the Aledo area are able to still sell their homes reasonably quick. And so we're seeing residential development in neighborhoods like Walsh, Morningstar, Kelly Ranch on the southern edge, Parks of Aledo. And then while not selling homes yet, we have Dean Ranch and Veal Ranch that will be coming in the next couple of years. They have begun on some of that development for those neighborhoods. So we're seeing the capacity to add new families and new children grow significantly, which is leading to the boom in the school district and the size of the school district for the Aledo area. So we are growing rapidly. We already have, like in the district, and I've mentioned in another video, and depending on where you look, the numbers are slightly different depending on the year. But as of the 2023-2024 school year, which was the last school year from when I'm making this video, we had about 8,800 students as a whole. That's all the 7 elementary schools, that's the 2 middle schools, and then the 1 high school in the 9th grade campus. But what projections show, and there's a 154-page demographic study that they put out in 2023, I think, we could surpass 20,000 students by 2033. So in 8 years, we could go from about 9,000 students to over 20,000 students. So there's gonna be some significant growth, and you're like, how in the world is this happening? And it's really interesting because it's not just more families moving into these neighborhoods in the Aledo area. The actual, and this is the term that's used, is the student yield per home is increasing. So we're having more homes come online with more families living in these homes, and the average student per home is also increasing. So you're getting this twofold or doubled rate of increase, not just more homes, but more kids per home at the same time. So there's a little bit of interesting statistics. I won't give you too much, super niche information, but Parks of Aledo, students per home has increased 10%. So from 0.79 to 0.87 students per home. So that's a 10% increase in Parks of Aledo. Morningstar has seen a 15% increase of students per home, and Walsh has seen the largest jump by far. Walsh, they went from 0.46 kids per home. We had a lot of young families moving in early in the process. Now they're having kids. These kids are getting into school now. So from 0.46 to 0.61, that was a 26% increase of children per home. And that's the fastest growing neighborhood. So you're just seeing this incredible density of students being built up. And that's what we're gonna talk about, like the density of students. So it's not just that we're building more homes, it's that families are having more kids per home, even with the additional homes. Okay, now with all of this student growth and really the density of the student growth, right? More kids per household and more households coming online in Aledo. The logical question is, well, what's happening with the schools? And that's what a big portion of this video is about. So some of the Aledo schools are basically already bursting at the seams. Some are going to be hitting capacity in the next few years. And so I want to touch on what kind of new schools or how many and when should those be expected? And before we do that, I want to tell you, like, we already added Aledo Elementary School in 2021. It's when that opened. We added a second middle school, McAnally Middle, in 2022. We added McKinney Elementary at the beginning of this school year. So the fall of 2024 is when McKinney Elementary opened up, which services Morningstar and some of the surrounding areas. And in the next decade, we may need to add up to 4 more elementary schools. In the later part of this video, I'll talk about maybe where and what does that mean. So up to 4 more elementary schools might need to be added in the next decade. We would take it from like 6 or 7 elementaries up to maybe 11, right? And then McAnally, the middle school that opened up in 2022, could hit capacity by 2027. Basically in a 5-year span, because of the amount of growth in Morningstar and some of the surrounding areas, that might hit capacity, which could require a rezoning shift or maybe a 3rd middle school. And then again, we'll touch on the touchy subject more in the video, but the 9th grade campus and Aledo High School, they could hit capacity by 2029. And then if nothing's done by 2033, they could exceed capacity by like 1,400 students. At some point, at a minimum, we're gonna have to add onto the high school campus, just straight up to service more students. I would also say at some point, an additional high school's gonna have to be added. That's just the reality. They're gonna have to alleviate overcrowding some way. In the temporary way, they may be able to add on to the campus, but long term, they are probably gonna have to add a additional high school campus. So let's get into what this means for the schools. Okay, so if you're house hunting in Aledo right now or in the near future, you might be wondering, Jared, where in the world are all of these new schools gonna go? And if you're not, you should be, because that could impact where your kids end up going to school. And now, while I'm not concerned about the quality of any new schools coming into the Aledo area, I do know that it can be disruptive and disheartening for kids to have to switch schools, and maybe they don't get to transfer with their best friend. And so that is something that, while maybe isn't the most important decision for you in a home purchase, it is probably something that most people would want to consider. A little less important maybe for elementary schools, but maybe more important as you progress through school, just for your kids, friend groups and all that stuff. So, we're gonna have, so McKinney just opened up this school year, the fall of 2024. It's currently 2025 right now. And that opened up just east of Morningstar. So that attendance zone is Morningstar and then some other areas around that, but not a very large attendance zone. Walsh is pretty tight to Walsh Ranch. And there could be up to 4 more needed in the next decade. So a lot of that growth is gonna happen around the McKinney and the Walsh areas. And I am not certain that they're gonna wanna split those neighborhoods up at all, right? Like, I kinda think that's gonna be really low on the totem pole. So if another school is placed somewhere in those areas, I think what would probably happen is that they would shrink like the Walsh Elementary to be just Walsh, and they would shrink McKinney to be just Morningstar, and then maybe another elementary school would service all the areas that those 2 elementary schools service that aren't in those specific neighborhoods. So there could be one going in that general area. But if you look at where some of the other development is going on and the large map area that some of the other schools cover, I'll be interested to see whether Stewart or Vandegrift are split up or rezoned in some way, right? They're just 2 huge amounts of land that those cover. But that's not really how you do the attendance zones. You have to say, well, where's the student population? And so there is lots of development going on in South Aledo, or the southern portion of Aledo ISD, but those neighborhoods aren't nearly as dense. Those are 1 to 2 acre neighborhoods rather than, less than 0.2. So the population density isn't there to like immediately demand that growth or like the additional schools. But I do think it's quite possible that they put at least 1 elementary school a little further south to service a lot of those neighborhoods on the southern portion. I think that Coder Elementary, if we're talking about potential rezoning, Coder Elementary may be one of the least likely zones to be rezoned, just because yes, there is some development around Parks of Aledo, but there's not a ton. Like, I don't know if there's gonna be enough development that demands that being split. So I think if you're in Parks of Aledo, you're pretty safe to be sticking with Coder. And then Aledo Elementary, I kind of doubt there's gonna be enough student population growth in that area because there's not a lot of new development. But I could be wrong as the demographics churn, as older people move out and younger people with kids move in, like we are. We will feed into Aledo Elementary. So that's where we are, but like in our neighborhood, there's not a huge density of small kids because a lot of people have lived there for 20 years. And so then you look at like McCall. McCall also has a pretty wide swath of land surrounding like the McKinney attendance zone, Morningstar, the Walsh area. So I'll be interested to see exactly where the elementary schools go. I do bet one is going to go in close to Walsh and Morningstar, but it's not going to service those neighborhoods. That's what I would guess. I would guess one's going to go in the southern portion of Aledo because there's just Kelly Ranch at Rio Vista, there's Blue Jack National, there's Maverick, which I would be incredibly surprised if anybody that lives in Maverick ever sends their kid to public school with the amount of money that they're going to have if they're buying in there. But you never know. But there's Bear Creek, there's La Madera, there's Maravilla, there's a bunch of neighborhoods that are developing. They're just a lot less dense. So in my head, I'm seeing, okay, maybe one near Walsh and Morningstar, one in the southern portion. I see one for maybe like Dean Ranch. So maybe that's gonna go maybe in the north of 20 on the west side of 3325, which is the Aledo exit, or maybe one going on the southeast side of that intersection, which might cut off a portion of like Vandergrift on the north side. So in my head, I envision 2 clear placements and then a third and a fourth maybe placement, but we'll see. We probably won't know for another 2 or 3 years at a minimum where they even are considering placing additional schools, because we're not at capacity yet. We're just approaching that. So that's the elementary schools. From the demographic report, it does look like the middle schools could hit some attendance capacities as early as 2027, and that is McAnally Middle School. So that one is currently, that's the one that services Walsh and Morningstar, and that makes sense. That's where an enormous amount of that population growth is happening. So one, they said either a rezone or a third, and I could see them if elementary schools are going in, not trying to do an elementary and a middle at the same time. Maybe they rezone, push some kids down into Aledo, maybe like Parks of Aledo. Maybe they get pushed into Aledo Middle School, which actually would make more sense as the population density increases at Walsh and Morningstar. But eventually, there will probably need to be a third middle school. And again, based on those population densities, I could see that going on the north side of 20. So you'd have 2 middle schools on the north side of 20 servicing Walsh, Morningstar, and Dean Ranch, and then one Aledo Middle School on the south side that basically would service everything south of 20. Again, just based on, there's not a huge population density other than Parks of Aledo and some of the older Aledo neighborhoods. And then we get to the touchy topic, which is the high school. So at some point, Aledo's gonna outgrow the ability to stay in one high school, most likely. And we're talking about not just the high school campus, we're talking about the combined 9th grade campus and the high school campus. Where are they gonna place that if and when they do? Are they, maybe they just try to grow on and expand and make a mega high school. Possibly. I don't know if that's what they're gonna do. I'm not saying that's what they're gonna do. Who knows? Because there's gonna be such a strong desire from parents and students to not be split, maybe they do that as long as they can. So maybe it's not 2029 or 2030, maybe it's a little later. At some point, Aledo's probably gonna get to the place where they can't service all of their high school students with their own high school. So where's that gonna go? I don't know. I'm purely guessing. There's no definitive plans that I can find anywhere or that I'm aware of, but it would not surprise me if that got placed on the north side of 20, right? That's just, again, that's where Walsh and Morningstar feed into, or that's where they are, and that's where there's excess land that's not south of like Aledo downtown. That's something to consider. Now, if your kids are going into high school or maybe they're already in junior high, probably not something you have to immediately worry about. Again, we're in 2025 right now. If your kids are entering high school next year, I wouldn't worry about it at all. But if you have, a second grader and you're worried about where they're gonna end up in high school, that's something to think about. So we're gonna get into and talk about, what all of these new schools are gonna mean for you and what you should be thinking about. Okay, so now that I just finished telling you about all these new schools that might be needed and where they might go, your next question is gonna be, well, Jared, what does that mean for the school zones? And the reality is that in the next decade, there's probably gonna be some rezoning of these attendance areas. So they're gonna have to split up attendance zones based on these new schools. And again, I've already covered it, but they're gonna be placing these schools where they're able to accurately service like the density of the population. So along with that, just knowing that there's going to be differences in attendance areas, that should be something that you think about. So if you want to prioritize avoiding a rezoning for yourself, you may focus on the smaller attendance zones right now, the ones that are less likely to be adjusted by new schools. And then secondarily, you would want to think about future placement of like the high school, right? And so we don't know where that's going to be. There's no definitive plans for that, but that is something that you should be aware of. If your kid's starting high school this year, it's probably not going to matter. Unlikely that that school is going to be even beginning to service students until like 2030. But then traffic. So as these new schools are placed, there's like rush hour for the schools. It's not rush hour for work, it's rush hour based on the school hours. So, you're gonna you get some traffic on 1187 and 20, and that can back up. And so then people will go to the Ranch House Road. Well, because Ranch House Road really isn't a major thoroughfare and it just doesn't service large amount of traffic very well, that also backs up. So there may be some level of expansion. 1187 is really pretty big. That just backs up very briefly in the mornings and the afternoons. But Ranch House Road, maybe they do something a little different. Not a whole lot of room for that road to be expanded, but maybe they figure out the lights, they do something again to improve on that. And then as the overall growth of the Aledo area happens, you're going to see an increase in traffic going into Fort Worth. Currently they're already expanding 20 and 30 right now. So as of yesterday, after the split, 20 going into Fort Worth and I-30 going into Fort Worth, both of them get down to one lane for a short period. And so we're already seeing some, basically some congestion as those roads are being expanded. So that's important to note. Just what do all these new schools mean? It means there's going to be some changing up of attendance zones. It means that there's going to be more traffic because there's more families, which is why more schools are going to be needed. Now that's a wrap for the Future of Aledo ISD 2025 edition, and big changes are coming. Now, if this is your first time on the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know what's going on in the future in the Aledo area, because my next video is going to be about the current setup and current things to know about Aledo ISD. And now, if you have already been on the channel a while and you are considering making your move to Aledo area and it's at the top of your list, I would encourage you to reach out, call, text, email, and let's start a conversation. Let me help you figure out what's going to be a great neighborhood for your family and what's important to know. I love having those conversations. Feel free to reach out however is most convenient, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you on the next video.